Hello. Um, I'm recording this video for my own A-level history teaching group, but it will be of general interest to other people who subscribe to my YouTube channel, in particular A-level history students. For my own particular group, you can watch this video. The slideshow you're looking at, you can download from the shared area, plus also the notes which I reference in this video. Purpose of the video is to take you through, for me, what is a really useful, one of the best lessons I was ever taught when I was a student at school, learning about how to tackle A-level history questions. And it was an approach. I call it the WXYZ approach. That's simply to help me remember it. So if it helps you remember this particular approach, then please use that term WXYZ. The main thing I'm addressing here is at A level you can easily sit down in the exam room, you see an A-level history question, and at first glance it just looks, it's something completely new. It can be, it can provoke what I call a rabbit in the headlights response, where you panic, and that's something you've got to try to avoid, because if you panic, then what you then happens is you just tend to sort of like write down everything you know about that particular topic, and you probably won't address the question, and in the end you're not really demonstrating the skills that A-level examiners are looking from you, which is your ability to analyse a question and to apply your knowledge in a structured way so that you answer the question. So kind of like learning an approach to question analysis helps in a sense calm you down and in the exam room, and it will get your mind thinking about the best way of approaching the question. So this is really useful. It certainly was for me, and I'm sure it will be for you too. So as you can see there, the three stages of question analysis, basically stages 1 and 2, in a sense what you do is you got all that knowledge in your head, okay, in the exam. Actually put it to one side and just look at the question almost as if you know nothing about this particular topic, okay? And what I'm saying to you here is stages 1 and 2, you could in a sense get somebody off the street, or you could get somebody who's done a completely different period of A-level history, nothing to do with what you're doing, and they should be able to do stages 1 and 2, because with stages 1 and 2, all you're doing is looking at the question and you're identifying what the main elements of the question are. But then the most important part, stage 3, is you then take your knowledge, which you put to one side, and having worked out what the elements of the question are in your line of argument, you then take your knowledge and you work out which bits of the knowledge you want to use in the answer to the question. And of course, that's the most important part, because you writing an A-level answer is about showing your knowledge, but it's also, which is part 3 there, but it's also about using your knowledge to answer the question, which is parts 1 and 2. So successful A-level essay writing is a hybrid of all those parts. You can't do one and not the other. If you just put knowledge down without applying it to the question, you're not going to basically pass. If all you do is analyse the question but put in no knowledge, you're not going to pass. You've got to have a combination of the two, which is the point we're making there. So I'm going to use an example. Here we've got a question that you're looking at the top there. It was primarily the constitution of the Second Reich that made governing the new Germany extremely difficult in the years 1871 to 79. And what I'll do here is I'll use blue to identify the topic, and I'll use red for the proposition. And that's our real first starting point, okay? Because I would go as far as to say that probably for the majority of A-level essay questions, for all periods, you can look at the question and you should be able to separate out these two things, the topic and the proposition. And if you can do that, and it's very easy to do, then you're well on your way to actually planning a decent A-level answer. So separate the topic from the proposition. Now basically the topic, which I'll use blue for, the topic is the event, what happened, okay, the core of what the question is about. So in this particular case, the event is Germany was extremely difficult to govern in the years 1871 to 79. Whereas the proposition, and I'll use red for this, the proposition element of the question is the reason why that event happened. So an A-level question will usually give you an event, and then it will give to you a suggested reason why that event happened. So you've got to separate the two out. So in this particular case, the constitution of the Second Reich is presented to you as a reason why Germany was difficult to govern. Okay, so you've therefore got the proposition, the 1871 constitution caused difficulties, and you've got the topic itself, which is the difficulties governing Germany between 1871 and 1879. So immediately you've separated those two things out, and the point is that that is my W, the topic is the W, so that will become the first, in a sense, building block of your answer, probably about the first quarter of your answer, and then the proposition will become parts X, Y, and Z. So clearly you've got to do more with the proposition. You need to break the proposition down into three elements that will become the main part of your answer. Okay, so your essay will consist of building blocks in that order, W, X, Y, Z, and you'll approach in that particular order. Okay, so let's break that down. So there is our topic. Germany was difficult to govern. Okay, and you'll notice here as well that even when we move into parts X, Y, Z of your answer, the topic is constantly there. Okay, it's the running thread. So the difficulties governing Germany between 1871 and 79 is the running thread that links your answer together. It holds your answer together. And part W, the beginning of your essay, very much focuses in on it. It shows knowledge about the difficulties governing Germany. The proposition, which forms the basis of parts X, Y, and Z, we then break into three bits. So part X, which is the second of the four building blocks in your answer, takes the proposition and it basically agrees with it. Yes, the 1871 Constitution did make it difficult to govern Germany between 1871 and 1879 for the following reasons. The next building block in your answer sticks with the 1871 Constitution. Okay, so there is the connection. But it turns it round and it says, did not make it difficult to govern Germany between 1871 and 1879. Or put it in some ways, it made it easier to govern Germany. So you're actually arguing against the proposition. You're presenting a counter-argument. You're still talking about the 1871 Constitution as a cause of the difficulties governing Germany, but you're arguing the opposite case. Then when you move into the final part of your answer, you're still talking about the difficulties governing Germany, but you're moving away from the 1871 Constitution and you're looking at other factors. So what you're doing is you're presenting an alternative proposition. So that is our classic approach. Now you look at that, and I've done all of that without actually using any knowledge about German history. I could be anyone off the street in a sense doing that. I have looked at the question and I've identified by looking at the question there are four building blocks to my answer, and that basically is the approach that you're going to take. Okay. Only at that point you take your knowledge, which you put to one side, and now the most important bit, you are going to basically choose which knowledge do I use to develop each of those 4 points. Now, in the exam, you have to pretty much do this in your head, but you can do it in your head because the knowledge is in your head, it's in your long-term memory. Over the 2 years of your course, I give you an essay question. I usually give you 3 weeks. You've got plenty of time. You can sit at home, you can do all the planning. My advice would be get a big sheet of paper, an A3 piece of paper, and put those 4 boxes on it exactly as I've shown you there. So you take topic, proposition, reverse the proposition. So that's our sort of thread going that way, that way, that way. Okay, so you've got your 4 blocks. You write out your topic sentences. Okay, so those topic sentences we've already identified. So the topic is Germany was difficult to govern between 1871 and 1879. That becomes the topic sentence. The proposition, the 1871 Constitution did make it difficult to govern Germany. That's the topic sentence. The next building block, the 1871 Constitution, in some ways made it easier to govern Germany, a topic sentence. And then finally, another topic sentence. On the other hand, other factors made it difficult to govern Germany. So those 4 topic sentences are crucial. They will be scattered throughout your answer at relevant points, okay, to really connect your essay together. But obviously in between all those topic sentences you've got to put your knowledge, and you've got to select relevant knowledge to develop each of those topic sentences. So apply your own knowledge to create the paragraphs. The building blocks in a sense become space holders for that particular part. Now you're applying your own knowledge to create the paragraph. Okay. Now, how many paragraphs are you going to put in? Well, that depends on how much knowledge you've got and what the topic is. Okay, so in this particular example, I've given 1 paragraph for the topic, 2 paragraphs for the proposition, 2 paragraphs for reversing the proposition, and 1 paragraph for an alternative proposition. It doesn't need to be that at all. Okay, it may be, I don't know, the proposition may only be 1 paragraph, the reverse the proposition may only be 1 paragraph, you may have 4 paragraphs to an alternative proposition. It doesn't really matter, it kind of depends on what you've got to say. Okay, but what you've done here, and the beauty of this approach, is it's got you thinking about it. Okay, you've identified your topic sentences first, which are based on the question. Now you're thinking about, what do I know and how am I going to use it to develop those topic sentences. Okay, now that in a sense is the difficult part, isn't it? That's the bit where you will naturally struggle. Okay, it's like thinking, it's the easy bit is in a way analysing the question and working out your topic sentences, but you've then got to think, right, what have I got to say? And if you struggle with it, it's fine. It's simply saying to you, your knowledge isn't yet mastered. You haven't got decent enough knowledge yet. And you might, at that point, have to go home and spend another few days doing more work on it. Okay, you may need to do more research. You may realise, I don't know enough about the 1871 Constitution. I've got to fill in the gaps. Or you may have amazing notes. You've made all your notes on the 1871 Constitution and the difficulties faced in Germany, but you've got to maybe face up to the fact it's not in your head yet. Revisit, make flashcards, get it into your long-term memory so that it becomes fingertip knowledge. Because in the final exam, this thinking has got to happen in your head very quickly. You can't really spend more than 2 or 3 minutes on the planning stage. Okay, so but that's what A-level is about. It's about mastering the knowledge and using your knowledge to answer the questions. Okay, so we'll move away from that example of difficulties governing Germany in the 1871 Constitution. We'll now take the question that you've just attempted. And I've marked and I've given you feedback, and I deliberately did not take you through this approach. I wanted you to kind of like learn by doing, and hopefully many of you, are looking at your essay thinking, oh, that wasn't particularly good. Well, that's great. That's exactly the point I wanted to make, is that I want you to think about how you could do this differently given a second opportunity. So I would strongly urge that following this video, you actually, if you find it useful, you then have that second attempt. Give it a second shot. Do it better. Okay, that's how you make progress. So here's the question. How accurate is it to say that domestic opposition in Germany to the war was mainly responsible? So remember, you separate out, you've got your W, which is the topic. So immediately now you're saying, right, what's the event? Well, the event is Germany decided to seek an armistice in 1918. That's your W. And then you've got your XYZ, which is the proposition. And the proposition is domestic opposition in Germany to World War I was responsible for Germany seeking the armistice. Or was it? Or were there other reasons? Okay, so you've immediately at a glance, hopefully, separated the topic from the proposition. Now, obviously, you've got to work out the XYZ. So get your bit of paper, as I said before, put your big boxes in, topic, proposition, reverse the proposition, present an alternative proposition. Okay, so clearly using this one, as we said, the topic is Germany's decision to seek an armistice. That's the topic. The proposition, domestic opposition, was the reason. Reversing the proposition is domestic opposition was not the reason. And then an alternative proposition would be there were other reasons why Germany sought an armistice. Okay, so that's what I mean, is that once you get into the habit of this, you can pretty much do it instantly with any question. So I've done that for you. Okay, so you can clearly see now what our topic sentences are going to be. So there are strong topic sentences immediately we've identified. So you're going to put those into your answer. Okay, they become the beginning of each building block. So Germany's decision to seek an armistice started off. Domestic opposition was the main cause. Domestic opposition did not cause it, and there were other causes. So we've identified those 4 elements. And then, having done that, you've got to then think about what do I know and what am I going to use, what information am I going to put into each of those boxes to develop it. And there's the Evans essay, which I think is wonderful, but clearly there's far too much. You can't even attempt to get all that information into 45 minutes. So, that's why you've got to think about what do I know and start selecting information and whereabouts is this information going to go into my answer, and etc. But in the exam, that's going to be in your head, not in your notes. So next part of the video is we take each of those building blocks and we now add the knowledge. Okay, so the first building block, as we just said, is showing knowledge about the topic. Okay, and as we've already said, the topic is Germany's decision to seek an armistice in 1918. Now, I would suggest to you, and this is entirely up to you, but usually the part W, building block W, showing knowledge about the topic, you can pretty much deal with in your introduction. Okay, so what I've done here is I've written an introduction for you, which, as you can see, you've got to show knowledge about the topic. You've got to make sure that you don't get accused by the examiner of simply repeating the question. The weakest introductions, the building block W, will simply repeat the question. You've got to demonstrate knowledge of it. So what do you know about Germany's decision to seek an armistice? Well, hopefully you know the person who made that decision was Ludendorff. The reason that he made the decision was he wanted to deflect attention away from his own military shortcomings, because, of course, he was leading the Western Front, and Germany had pinned all its hopes on the Western Front. They'd launched a big attack in March 1918. Germany had gone on the advance. It looked as if Germany was going to win World War I after 4 years of stalemate, and then suddenly in July 1918, Germany fell into retreat. And if Germany carried on retreating, she'd be retreating back onto her own soil, crossing her own frontier back into Germany. And if that were to happen, then it would be a military disaster. Everyone would be blaming the army for Germany's defeat. So the decision to seek an armistice was to end the war quickly and to blame the politicians on the home front, declining morale on the home front for Germany's defeat. Now, hopefully you've got all that knowledge in your head. You know it instantly. The question is really about the stab in the back. That's the topic. The topic is Ludendorff and the stab in the back. You know that instantly. Okay, so there would be my introduction. I've written an introduction for you. Okay, let's read it. The question is about the stab in the back myth, hatched by General Ludendorff and the military high command in the autumn of 1918. The decision to seek an armistice was made by Ludendorff, who blamed domestic opposition to the war, socialists, left-wing politicians, etc., as a way of deflecting blame for Germany's defeat away from his own disastrous military decisions on the Western Front. But was domestic opposition the main cause for Germany's surrender, as Ludendorff maintained? This essay will argue that other factors, especially German military weakness, were more important than domestic opposition as a cause of Germany's surrender in 1918. Now, can you see what I've done there with the underlining? In that introduction, I've underlined additional own knowledge. Okay, a weak candidate would reference the question, and this introduction does reference the question. It says the decision to seek an armistice, domestic opposition, the main cause of Germany's surrender, domestic opposition. So the bits in red are repeating the question, they're showing awareness of the question, but I've also scattered into my introduction additional knowledge. And that's what we mean when we say you've got to show knowledge about the topic in your building block W. Don't just repeat the terms of the question. Okay? And a good introduction will also sow the seed of what your conclusion is going to be at the end. And see how I do that there. This essay will argue that other factors, especially German military weakness, were more important. So I can see where your argument's going to go at the beginning of your essay, and that's really, really important. We'll get on to the conclusion at the end, but you don't want to just reach a conclusion. The worst type of conclusion at the end is where the examiner has no idea what it's going to be, and it suddenly comes upon you. That's building block W. Building block X, as we said, you're agreeing with the proposition. You've already worked out your strong topic sentence. Domestic opposition was a contributing factor to the decision. Now you've got to develop it with detailed knowledge. So this is bringing your knowledge. And it's got to be relevant to the topic sentence that you've just written down. So you develop that point, okay? So you've got to link it to the topic. Ludendorff, and you do this here, Ludendorff justified his decision to seek an armistice by blaming opposition to the war on the home front. That's the most important bit. If all you do here in this part X is describe domestic opposition on the home front, but you make no reference to the decision to seek an armistice, you don't link it. If you don't link it to the topic, then it becomes narrative. So you can see what I've done there is that the link was Ludendorff justifying his decision to seek an armistice by blaming mounting opposition. So you make that point. You've got to make that point very, very clearly. And then you've got to show knowledge. What was the domestic opposition that had been building up on the home front? Well, it's been building up since 1918. It had peaked in 1918, but in 1917, in the Reichstag, there had been Erzberger's peace resolution. In January 1918, 400,000 workers had gone on strike. There had been declining morale on the home front caused by the British blockade, food shortages, the turnip winter, disease, malnourishment. You know, you could bring in a quote from Watson, all within that part of the answer. Okay, so you are supporting the proposition. You're saying, yes, domestic opposition was a factor that led to the decision to seek an armistice, and you're showing knowledge about that. But you then move on to the next part of the answer. Now, the next part of the answer, you're sticking to the proposition. So you're still talking about domestic opposition, but you're turning it around and you're saying, you could argue, though, that it was not the main cause of the decision to seek an armistice. Okay? So you're not talking about other causes, you're still talking about domestic opposition. Now, that's where you've got to really sort of apply good historical thinking, okay? Well, and I would say an argument would be, well, look, there's been domestic opposition ever since 1915. Arguably, domestic opposition peaked in 1917 with Erzberger's peace resolution in the Reichstag. So if domestic opposition had been that important in causing the armistice, why then wasn't the armistice earlier in 1917? So clearly there must be other factors that caused the decision to seek an armistice. It can't be just domestic opposition. So you're kind of developing a historical point here. And what I would say is you're saying, well, the reason why domestic opposition didn't cause an armistice in 1917 was because the political leaders who would make the decision who were responsible for the home front had been sidelined, and Germany was being run by the military leaders, and that's all to do with basically the lifted hopes, the Russian Revolution, German troops released from the Eastern Front over to the West, spring offensive in 1918. Everybody was putting their hopes in a military victory in the West. So therefore, domestic opposition was marginalised. It was not taken seriously. It did not have an impact. Okay, so you're talking about domestic opposition, but you're using your historical knowledge to argue that domestic opposition did not have that impact. And then you move into your final building block, And here you can then move away from domestic opposition. You're still talking about the decision to seek an armistice. That's the running thread. But you're now going to say there were other factors. There were other things that had that big impact. And I would argue here, and this is where I would particularly bring in the Evans material, my counter or my argument of other factors that caused the decision to seek an armistice were twofold. One, the real reason for seeking an armistice in November 1918 was German military weaknesses and the mistakes that were being made, not on the home front, but on the fighting front. That blind pursuit of total victory, the spring offensive of March 1918, where Germany broke out of the trenches with these extra troops that they'd brought over from the east, pushed further into France. It looked as if they were going to win the war, but then suddenly, in the middle of July 1918, suddenly that advance turned into a military retreat, and nobody could understand it. And what that did is it basically exposed there were some huge fundamental underlying problems with the German army, military weaknesses, all sorts of things, failures of German military intelligence. They were not winning the war in the air, the failure of submarine warfare. They made lots of tactical errors. The fact that their allies, Austria-Hungary, and then at the end of September 1918, Bulgaria pulled out, which left Germany alone. There was declining morale on the fighting front. Soldiers were deserting from the front line, going back home. All of these factors led to the massive retreat in the summer and autumn of 1918, which were the real short-term reasons for the armistice, the immediate reasons why Ludendorff suddenly announced we have to put up the white flag and surrender. Okay, you developed a good alternative proposition. Were there any others? Yes, there was another one. I would argue that it was also to do with, it wasn't all about German weaknesses, it was also about the strengths of the Allies, in particular the Americans and the British. The American entry into the war, they had superior military intelligence, they had a convoy system that made the German submarine warfare ineffective. The way they dropped leaflets over German front line was a major factor that led to many German soldiers deserting. The impact of gas warfare, they developed superior masks that made the German use of gas warfare ineffective, more effective use of tanks, etc. So you're saying it wasn't just about domestic opposition, it wasn't just about problems on the home front. There were genuine military reasons why Germany sought an armistice. So you're presenting an alternative proposition. And you then get to your conclusion, and that's where hopefully you've sowed seeds throughout your answer, beginning with the introduction, so that by the time the examiner gets to your conclusion, the examiner pretty much knows what your conclusion is going to be. A weak A-level essay, the examiner doesn't really know what your conclusion is going to be until they get to it. And that's often a sign of the fact that the candidate themselves didn't know what the conclusion was going to be until they got to it. Again, that weak answer comes from the fact that candidates will often launch into an answer without thinking it through. So you've got to, part of the question analysis is thinking, what are the building blocks? What do I want to say? And what will my conclusion be when I get to it? So you can sow little seeds to it, starting with your introduction. Remember when we looked at your introduction, I showed you how you can give it a little clue as to what your conclusion is going to be. So it doesn't matter what the conclusion is, as long as it is consistent with your line of argument. And so my particular conclusion was this, but yours may be different. It is the decision to seek an armistice was ultimately a result of poor military leadership. That was more important than growing domestic opposition. Growing domestic opposition did have an influence, okay, but it had no influence on government decisions because the military were in control. Ultimately, the military leadership must take the blame. So not only have I got off the fence, a weak introduction, a weak conclusion would simply say, oh, there were lots of reasons for Germany seeking an armistice. You mustn't do that. A strong introduction says, look, there were a variety of reasons, but get off that fence. This reason was more important than the others because, okay? And you've got to pull that together with a reason why, which hopefully you can see in that particular conclusion. So there we go. Okay, so now specifically for my own teaching group, you will need to follow up by emailing me your self-evaluation. Call your email essay number 3, self-evaluation. And I've given the deadline for that. And as usual, a series of bullet points. It doesn't need to be long, but each bullet point must basically say, in future, when I write an essay, I'm going to improve by doing this, and start off with your highest priority targets. Finally, as I said at the beginning of this video, I've identified for you here 6 essay questions. Okay, and remember the point I said is that you can actually, this process of question analysis, that certainly the first 2 stages of the 3, you put your knowledge to one side. So you can actually do this without knowledge. It doesn't really matter. No matter what, somebody who's done a completely different period of history could do this simply by looking at the questions. Okay, so put any knowledge you may have on these topics to one side, and actually most of them from number 2 onwards, we haven't even taught those particular topics yet, and you can apply this approach. So what I've done here, and you can basically print them off on the slide, is I've prepared the sheets, so the questions at the top, and you've got your 4 boxes, and you can look at the question and basically do it. Okay, so there's that first one. To what extent did Hitler's power rest on consensual dictatorship? Okay, so you can take the approach here. The topic, okay, is Hitler's power. The proposition is Hitler's power was caused by consensual dictatorship. That's the proposition. Reversing the proposition would be consensual dictatorship did not cause Hitler's power. An alternative proposition would be Hitler's power was caused by other things. Okay? Another one. Nazi popularity in Germany between 1933 and 1935 was largely dependent on propaganda. How far do you agree? The topic is Nazi popularity. The proposition is Nazi popularity was dependent on propaganda. Propaganda caused Nazi popularity. The reverse proposition is propaganda did not cause Nazi popularity. The alternative proposition, there were other causes of Nazi popularity. Same approach. To what extent were the Allied powers responsible for the division of Germany in the years 1945 to 49? The topic, the division of Germany. The proposition, the Allied powers were responsible for it. Reversing the proposition, the Allied powers were not responsible. An alternative proposition, there were other reasons for the division of Germany. What about the reunification of Germany in 1990? So again, you might well just want to pause the video and do this yourself, and then I'll tell you the answer. So, the topic, the reunification of Germany. The proposition, it was caused by the leadership of Helmut Kohl. Reversing the proposition, the reunification of Germany was not caused by the leadership of Helmut Kohl. An alternative proposition, there were other reasons for the reunification of Germany. Again, one more, the last one. So again, you may want to pause the video, think it through yourself, and then press play again. So the topic, the problems in Germany in 1989. The proposition, problems in the USSR caused the problems in Germany, in East Germany. Reversing the proposition, problems in the USSR did not cause the problems in East Germany. An alternative proposition, there were other causes of the problems in East Germany in 1989. So you just turn it around. Okay, so hopefully that this video has helped give you a bit of confidence in how you can analyse essay questions. I'll stop the video there. Thank you very much.